My childhood friend, Gu Si Yuan, married the most talented woman in the capital, Lin Xi. At their wedding banquet, young Marquis Lu and I, both heartbroken, drowned our sorrows in drink, because I had feelings for Gu Si Yuan, and he admired Lin Xi. We drank until we were completely wasted, and in front of everyone, I clung to him, sobbing heart-wrenchingly, and just like that, our families forced us into marriage. On our wedding night, I noticed a portrait of Lin Xi hanging on the wall of the bridal chamber. In the spirit of fairness, I pulled out a portrait of Gu Si Yuan from my sleeve and hung it beside hers. At that moment, young Marquis Lu entered the room and suddenly remarked, "Looking at them like this, they really do seem like a perfect match." Today, the general's residence was brightly lit and decorated, and the new bride had already been welcomed into the household. The bride, Lin Xi, was the daughter of the prime minister. She was beautiful, graceful, and the most talented woman in the capital. Gu Si Yuan, dressed in a grand wedding robe, smiled warmly as he drank cup after cup of wine offered by the guests. My brother whispered endlessly in my ear, "Sister, it was you and Gu Si Yuan who grew up together as childhood sweethearts, but that Lin Xi swooped in and took him first." I sat in the corner, pouring and drinking on my own, miserably drowning myself in wine. My brother snatched the wine jug from my hand. "Sister, the wine here at the general's residence has no flavor. How about I take you to Zuishan Tavern for a proper drink?" I knew my brother was afraid that I would get drunk and make a scene by trying to steal the groom, so he was finding ways to persuade me to leave. I glared at him bitterly. "Qing Yan Lang, do I look like the kind of shameless woman who would steal someone else's husband?" Despite being twins, Qing Yan Lang and I never seemed to share any mutual understanding. Well, my brother was too scared to speak, afraid of getting beaten up. After all, I had a notorious reputation in the capital, once even publicly pinning down and beating up Song Yutong, the daughter of Grand Tutor Song. I was known as a brutish woman who resorted to violence at the slightest disagreement. "I don't think Miss Qin seems that way," came a reply from the neighboring table. It was Lu Lin, the young marquis, and an admirer of Lin Xi. At this moment, his handsome face was flushed red, and the 4 wine jars scattered on his table, toppled over, showed that he had drunk quite a lot. Feeling increasingly drunk, I raised a fist in salute to him. "Thank you for the praise, young Marquis Lu. Since we are both fellow sufferers, why not join me for a few more drinks?" Upon hearing this, young Marquis Lu staggered to his feet and, swaying slightly, shifted his seat next to mine. "Sister, this isn't appropriate. You can't just go around drinking with men." My brother urged in protest, but he underestimated how much 2 people, both heartbroken, craved the escape that only wine could provide. I raised my cup and drank heartily with the young Marquis Lu, both of us swearing not to stop until we were drunk. Before long, we had emptied an entire jar of wine. In the end, the more we drank, the more intoxicated we became. Despite my brother's vehement objections, we began calling each other brothers on the spot. Under the eyes of everyone present, we embraced and cried together. Strictly speaking, it was me holding on to him, and the one sobbing heart-wrenchingly was also just me. It was said that the entire hall could only hear my wailing, like a funeral lament. My brother, standing by, was anxiously shouting, "Sister, quickly let go of young Marquis Lu." The more he tried to pull me away, the more rebellious I became, hugging young Marquis Lu even tighter. Seeing that the situation was getting out of control, my brother simply used his sleeve to cover his handsome face, hoping the guests wouldn't recognize him as the heir of the Marquis of Dongning. Clinging to young Marquis Lu, I pitifully said, "Do you know? He loves playing with swords and spears. When I was young, I practiced martial arts just to get close to him, but who knew, he actually likes gentle and graceful ladies." Lu Lin, I hic. Before I could finish my sentence, I let out a loud drunken hiccup. Although young Marquis Lu was also drunk, he didn't forget to gently pat my back to help me catch my breath. I also thought she liked refined gentlemen as graceful as orchids, so I spent day and night training my posture. Who knew, she actually prefers men of strength and vigor. Hearing this, I cried even harder. Boo-hoo, they're a perfect match, while we were just 2 pathetic simps together. At that moment, young Marquis Lu whispered something in my ear, but unfortunately, I was too drunk to hear it clearly. That night, my embarrassing behavior at Gu Si Yuan's wedding banquet spread like wildfire, quickly becoming the talk of the entire city. When my father, furious as a wrathful deity, threatened to punish me with the family rules, my mother stood in his way with all her might. It wasn't until my brother mentioned that the man I had clung to relentlessly was none other than young Marquis Lu that my father's expression changed instantly. He was overjoyed, slapping the table and exclaiming, "Marriage! You must marry young Marquis Lu." The very next day, young Marquis Lu was dragged to my house by his grandfather to propose marriage. Chests upon chests of betrothal gifts filled the front courtyard of the Marquis of Doning's residence. Suffering from a terrible hangover, my head felt foggy and heavy the entire time. In contrast, Lu Lin appeared completely refreshed, as if nothing had happened. During this time, my father and old Marquis Lu chatted happily, nodding approvingly at us again and again. Lu Lin and I exchanged glances, each waiting for the other to speak up and protest the marriage. To our surprise, even after the 3 letters and 6 rituals were completed and the wedding date was set, neither of us had spoken up. There was no longer any chance to reverse this, yet still, neither of us had objected. Only my brother stood up in strong opposition, but he was immediately beaten up by my father until he became obedient. I thought, since young Marquis Lu hadn't refused, as the one who caused all the trouble, I couldn't reject the marriage either and embarrass them all. My brother, certain that Lu Lin and I would become a resentful couple, whimpered, "Sister, you really ruined your life by drinking." The wedding between me and young Marquis Lu was held with great splendor, in no way inferior to the one between Gu Si Yuan and Lin Xi. Seeing that I was the only one left in the bridal chamber, I lifted my veil on my own, wandering around the room out of boredom. By chance, I caught sight of a painting on the wall, depicting Lin Xi playing the qin. Though it only showed her from behind, the delicate portrayal of her gestures was quite lifelike, clearly demonstrating the artist's dedication. For the sake of fairness, I took out a drawing of Gu Si Yuan practicing swordsmanship from my sleeve and hung it beside Lin Xi's painting. At this moment, young Marquis Lu happened to step into the room. He paused for a second, then suddenly remarked, "Looking at them like this, they really do seem like a perfect match." I couldn't help but admire young Marquis Lu's keen observation skills. Somehow, he managed to recognize that the poorly drawn stick figure wildly waving a sword, barely distinguishable as male or female, was indeed Gu Si Yuan. I picked up the wedding wine, handing a cup to young Marquis Lu, and said, "Great minds think alike." I had to admit, in all of the capital, only Lin Xi was truly a match for Gu Si Yuan. Although Lin Xi had once been my rival in love, even if I selfishly wanted to find fault with her, she was simply too outstanding, leaving no room for any criticism. Lu Lin, with complete ease, drank the wedding wine in one gulp. Then, as he helped me remove the heavy headpiece, he gently asked, "Are you hungry? Do you feel like going to Zuishan Tavern for some pork knuckle?" At the mention of Zuishan Tavern's pork knuckle, I eagerly nodded, full of enthusiasm. "Let's go, I've been starving." No time to waste. The owner of Zuishan Tavern was very perceptive. Seeing that young Marquis Lu and I were dressed in bright red wedding attire, he sent us 2 extra dishes and a jug of wine. He even congratulated us, saying, "Congratulations to the both of you, true lovers finally become family." I couldn't help but ask out of curiosity, "You recognize us?" The owner pointed to the 2 plates of pork knuckles on the table and smiled like a Maitreya Buddha too, saying, "Only you two enjoy eating my pork knuckles dipped in vinegar." Naturally, that left a deep impression on me. I suppose such a shared preference is indeed a rare kind of fate. Hearing this, both young Marquis Lu and I were startled, and we immediately put down the vinegar-soaked pork knuckles, afraid that eating too much would deepen our fate even further. Come to think of it, young Marquis Lu and I first met at Zuishan Tavern. At that time, Gu Si Yuan and Lin Xi frequently met at the tavern. One day, I secretly followed Gu Si Yuan to the tavern. At that time, the Zuishan Tavern was packed with people. In order to spy on my beloved and my love rival, I had no choice but to pick a random, pleasing-looking man to share a table and meal with. That stranger turned out to be none other than young Marquis Lu, who had come following Lin Xi. Watching my beloved chatting and laughing intimately with someone else, whispering sweet nothings, I angrily spat out the pork knuckle bone I had just finished gnawing on and cursed through clenched teeth. Lin Xi, that green tea. Young Marquis Lu, also gnawing on a pork knuckle, fumed angrily. Gu Si Yuan, that hypocritical pretender. Since we had spoken at the exact same time, we looked at each other in surprise. "Do you like Lin Xi? Do you like Gu Si Yuan?" As they say, the simp of my enemy is my friend. Young Marquis Lu and I instantly hit it off and decided to exchange information on our rivals, plotting to break up Lin Xi and Gu Si Yuan. I knew Gu Si Yuan's likes and dislikes like the back of my hand, And young Marquis Lu was just as familiar with Lin Xi's preferences. Over the course of this year, wherever Lin Xi and Gu Si Yuan went, young Marquis Lu and I could always be found lurking in the shadows. Who would have thought that instead of breaking them up, the two of us would end up getting married unexpectedly? After returning to the residence, 2 hours had already passed. On the night of the wedding candles had burned down more than halfway, as if urging the newlyweds not to miss the auspicious hour. I removed my makeup, took off the heavy wedding gown, and sat nervously by the bed, wearing only my undergarments. To my surprise, after Lu Lin finished washing up, he walked straight to the couch, leaving the wedding bed entirely for me. What did he mean by this? Was he planning to let me spend the wedding night alone? Thinking about the painting he had hung in the bridal chamber, I couldn't help but snap at him. Lu Lin, since you intend to remain faithful to Lin Xi, why did you agree to marry me in the first place? He paused, startled, and hurriedly explained, I'm not doing this for her. I just was afraid you wouldn't want to. I looked at him directly and said seriously, I don't mind. As soon as the words left my mouth, the room suddenly darkened. Lu Lin had extinguished one of the red candles. Carefully, he lifted me into his arms, and in the dim light, I felt the burning intensity of his gaze. The night of passion lasted until the last of the wedding candles had burned out. The day after our grand wedding, the princess's residence hosted a flower appreciation banquet, and an invitation was sent to Lu Lin's desk. Lu Lin, concerned I might be too tired, kindly suggested, if you don't want to go, I can decline it for you. I took the invitation and replied, I'll go. Since it's the princess's grand invitation, it wouldn't be polite to refuse. I feared the flower banquet was just an excuse, and their real intent was to see me humiliated. Since I was bored anyway, I decided to attend this potential trap. The princess's residence was luxurious and extravagant, with noble ladies and women of high status from the capital gathered together. Once again, I saw Lin Xi, seated beside the princess. Lin Xi now had her hair styled in a married woman's updo, her demeanor graceful and dignified, with an added touch of delicate charm in her features. Lin Xi had once been the study companion to Princess Shuhua, so it wasn't surprising to see her at the princess's banquet. Just as I found an empty seat and sat down, I felt a burning, venomous gaze on me. It was Song Yutong, seated diagonally across from me, glaring as if she wished to bore a hole through me. Previously, Song Yutong had accidentally caught sight of me and Lu Lin boating together on the lake. She mocked me for being fickle and shameless, only to end up with a black eye and a bruised face after I punched her. I unceremoniously rolled my eyes at her in return. Song Yutong haughtily turned her head with a cold snort and began whispering with the princess. Princess Shuhua was a bold and carefree woman. She had just turned 15 this year, and already she had audaciously kept 10 or so male concubines in her residence. Such a shocking and unconventional act truly made her a paragon among women. I genuinely admired her, but sadly, her taste in people was a bit off. She had made a close confidant out of someone as ordinary as Song Yutong. I had barely lifted a chopstick of food to my mouth when Song Yutong made her move against me. Qin Yan Qing, weren't you deeply infatuated with General Gu? How could you so easily marry young Marquis Lu? Could it be that you're just using the young Marquis as a substitute for comfort? Song Yutong was truly annoying. When she stayed silent, it was fine, but the moment she spoke, she managed to offend 4 people at once. Lin Xi slightly furrowed her elegant brows and gave me a look of unclear meaning. Of course, Lin Xi had always known about my previous feelings for Gu Si Yuan. I met her gaze openly, without a hint of embarrassment. Tell me, which woman in the capital doesn't admire General Gu, a brave and patriotic hero? He's courageous in battle, loyal to the throne, and loves his country. Such a rare and excellent man. Isn't it natural for the women of Nanlin to admire him? Song Yutong hadn't expected me to admit it so openly, and to top it off, I unabashedly praised Lin Xi's husband right in front of her. Song Yutong's face turned livid with rage. You're all just sweet talk. You only set your sights on young Marquis Lu after General Gu married Miss Lin. You deliberately got him drunk and schemed against him, ruining his reputation so he had no choice but to marry a shrew like you. I tilted my head at her words, pretending to be puzzled. Miss Song, you keep bringing up my husband, young Marquis Lu, and you're getting so worked up. Could it be that you're jealous of my marriage to him? Around us, the noble women started whispering to each other. After all, Song Yutong had just gotten engaged to the second son of the Minister of Rights last month. Her behavior now wasn't just about gaining the upper hand in the moment, it was also a veiled display of jealousy. Song Yutong's tone grew flustered. You're talking nonsense. Who's jealous? Do you think everyone is as fickle and shameless as you? Does she need another beating? I shot her a warning glance. Song Yutong shrank back, instinctively touching her cheek. Though she had layered on thick powder, it barely concealed the faint bruises on her cheekbones. I shook my head, calmly picking up another bite of food, deciding to ignore this jealous mad dog. Fortunately, Princess Shuhua did not stand up for Song Yutong after seeing her take a hit, but instead smiled warmly at Lin Xi. Lin Xi, I owe you an apology. I did not know you were pregnant, yet still had you run around like this. It truly was inappropriate, Lin Xi responded with a soft smile. I should be thanking the princess. I was feeling cooped up in the residence and was just thinking about finding a place to lift my spirits. The invitation from the princess's residence came at the perfect time, like a timely rain. Lin Xi was indeed likable, her words were sincere, and her demeanor was neither too humble nor arrogant. Noticing that I had put down my chopsticks to look at Lin Xi, Song Yutong seized the opportunity to stir up trouble again. Among us, Lin Xi is the luckiest, she said. Not only did she marry a man she loves, but now she is also expecting a child, truly enviable. As she spoke, she cast a malicious glance in my direction. Unlike some people, who, despite using every means to win over young Marquis Lu, still ended up marrying a man who doesn't love her. The rest of her life will likely be spent alone, sleepless, and miserable. At this, the noblewomen and ladies around us all turned their probing gazes towards us. I responded with a polite smile and said frankly, surely, Miss Song must have a deep understanding of this. After all, being engaged to someone you've never even met must make the rest of your life all the more difficult to endure. Song Yutong and the second son of the Minister of Rites, Feng Yun, were only engaged through the arrangement of their parents and the words of a matchmaker. This Feng Yun was a typical playboy, and it was said that he often spent nights in brothels, yet, she had the audacity to mock me. Song Yutong's face flushed as red as a liver, and before she could retort, I raised my voice deliberately. My husband, young Marquis Lu, is as graceful as a jade tree, upright and gentle in nature, and always puts me first. A gentleman is judged by his actions, not his heart. Even if we do not speak of romantic love between us, we trust and rely on each other completely. That is a bond more precious than any fleeting affection. Marrying him, I feel no regret. Song Yutong looked utterly disdainful, clearly thinking that I was just holding on to my pride despite suffering inside. Princess Shuhua, on the other hand, looked at me with interest, her expression one of amusement. Qing Yan Qing, you seem quite satisfied with young Marquis Lu? Indeed, I am, I replied, seizing this opportunity to dispel their malicious gossip. Although I didn't care much for others' opinions, I didn't want to wrong Lu Lin either. I, Qing Yan Qing, have never been someone who clings stubbornly to a dead end. When it comes to matters of love, if I gain it, I gladly accept it. If I lose it, why should I wallow in it? There are plenty of fine men in this world, I'll simply choose another who satisfies me. A gentleman like young Marquis Lu is also someone I would gladly pursue. Princess Shuhua beamed brightly and raised her wine cup to me. Well said, Qing Yan Qing, you are indeed a wise and understanding person. A woman should be able to take things up and put them down. As they say, pluck the flowers while they are in bloom, and enjoy the wine while it flows. I laughed and drank my fruit wine. Princess Shuhua, though mischievous and fond of stirring up trouble, was certainly no fool. Sure enough, after putting down her cup, Princess Shuhua intentionally glanced at Song Yutong and remarked, "Look at this garden full of rare and exotic flowers. They bloom with the seasons, each displaying its unique beauty. They do not do so just to win fleeting admiration from onlookers. We, as women, should be the same. We must not confine ourselves to the inner chambers, competing only in beauty and attacking each other, forgetting the strength and dignity that women should have." Faced with Princess Shuhua's public rebuke, Song Yutong lowered her head in embarrassment, not daring to speak. The rest of the flower appreciation banquet was filled with laughter and cheer, a joyful and harmonious atmosphere. When I walked out of the princess's residence, I looked up and saw two carriages parked side by side. In front of one of the carriages stood a tall, imposing figure. It was Gu Si Yuan. Despite being a military general, Gu Si Yuan often dressed in light moon-white clothes, resembling a refined and gentle nobleman. Upon seeing him again, I felt no ripples in my heart. I shifted my gaze to the side. There, Lu Lin stood with his arms crossed, leaning against his carriage, looking effortlessly dashing in his black attire. Between him and Gu Si Yuan, it felt as if there was an invisible boundary, a line that neither would cross. Although the two were only separated by a carriage, they managed to completely ignore each other. I couldn't help but find it amusing. Gu Si Yuan, mistakenly thinking I was greeting him, nodded politely with a smile. At that moment, Lu Lin seemed to sense something, and he lifted his head. He frowned slightly, glaring at Gu Si Yuan with clear displeasure, before muttering something under his breath. Si Yuan, you're here? A gentle, melodious voice came from behind me. I turned to see Lin Xi approaching gracefully, supported by a maid. No wonder Lu Lin had looked like he was ready to devour Gu Si Yuan moments ago. It was because he had seen Lin Xi. Just as I was thinking this, Lu Lin strode over toward us. I bit my lip, wondering if he was going to lose his composure and start pestering Lin Xi right in front of Gu Si Yuan. But to my surprise, Lu Lin walked right past Lin Xi and came directly toward me. With an intense expression, he grabbed my wrist and inspected it, turning it back and forth. Why are your clothes dirty? Did someone in the princess's residence give you trouble? Was it Princess Shuhua? Following his gaze, I noticed a large oil stain on my sleeve and quickly shook my head, embarrassed. No, it wasn't. I accidentally did this myself. To make it easier to practice martial arts, I always wore narrow-sleeved outfits, but for today's banquet, I had changed into a wide-sleeved dress, and I must have accidentally stained it while picking up food. Realizing how overly anxious he had been, Lu Lin quickly loosened his grip and awkwardly cleared his throat. Ahem, as long as it's nothing. Warmth spread through my heart, and I naturally took his hand. I didn't eat enough at the princess's residence. Let's go to Zuaishan Tavern for another meal, then let's go. Lu Lin smiled, the corners of his lips lifting. Before we left, I courteously bid farewell to Gu Si Yuan and Lin Xi. When Lu Lin helped me onto the carriage, he left me with a cryptic remark. Now that we're married, you can't behave like before. You must keep your distance from Gu Si Yuan. I nodded. Alright, you too. In the carriage, Lu Lin handed over a food box. Have something to eat first. I quickly took it and opened it. This is osmanthus cake from the alley on South Street, and it's still warm. Did you buy it before coming to the princess's residence? Lu Lin instinctively clenched his hand and replied. The princess's residence has many rules. I was afraid you might feel uncomfortable and not eat enough. I remember you liked the osmanthus cake made by that elderly couple. The light filtering through the window cast a soft glow on Lu Lin's sharp profile, making his handsome features even more striking. My heart began to beat like a drum, almost beyond control. This osmanthus cake was from a small stall that Lu Lin and I had stumbled upon during this year's Lantern Festival. At that time, there was a temple fair and lantern displays on South Street, and the place was packed with people. Before long, we had lost track of Gu Si Yuan and Lin Xi in the crowd. With no other choice, Lu Lin and I, having already made it there, decided to wander around together. We strolled aimlessly, stopping here and there, and eventually found a wonton stall nearby where we took a brief rest. But as soon as we sat down, we accidentally witnessed an act of bullying. A man selling candied fruits and cakes was angry that the elderly couple across from him had taken much of his business. He started cursing at them, deliberately causing trouble, and even flipped over the couple's cake stall. I was just about to step in when I saw Lu Lin take the initiative, kicking the man to the ground and making him compensate the elderly couple for their losses. That man, being the type to bully the weak but fear the strong, threw some money down in a panic and ran off without even packing up his stall. At that moment, Lu Lin seemed to be glowing with a faint aura, and I found myself unknowingly drawn to him. The elderly couple, moved to tears, gave us 2 large boxes of osmanthus cake. Thank you, young master, for helping us. Young lady, you've found yourself a fine husband. No, we're not. I hurried to explain. Lu Lin didn't say anything. He just took the 2 boxes of cake and placed them in my hands. The warmth of his touch lingered on my palms, burning hot, and my face suddenly flushed bright red. At the time, I didn't understand what that feeling meant, but on the way back, I unconsciously finished both boxes of osmanthus cake. When I returned home, I tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. Since the age of 8, when Gu Si Yuan saved me from the jaws of a vicious dog, it had become my habit to chase after him. In my heart, it was supposed to be Gu Si Yuan that I cared about. So why did Lu Lin keep appearing in my thoughts? I was deeply troubled, realizing that I had become a woman with a divided heart. After that, Lu Lin and I continued to follow closely behind Gu Si Yuan and Lin Xi. However, watching them be so affectionate with each other no longer made me as angry as before. It was only then that I realized a truth. I liked Lu Lin. That feeling was even stronger than what I had felt for Gu Si Yuan. Every time I met Lu Lin's gaze, my heart raced uncontrollably. To avoid arousing Lu Lin's suspicion, I continued to act jealous and petty. When Gu Si Yuan finally got married, I felt both relieved and reassured. Gu Si Yuan was like the moon hanging high in the sky. My feelings for him were more of admiration for a lifesaver than anything else, but Lu Lin was like a lantern within arm's reach. Though its light was faint, it gave me an overwhelming sense of security. After all, the moon could illuminate everyone. But a lantern would only shine for me, and could only shine for me. I took out a piece of cake and held it near Lu Lin's mouth, saying, "Lu Lin, let's just head back to the residence." Lu Lin swallowed the cake whole and asked, puzzled, "We're not going to Zuishan Tavern for pork knuckles anymore?" I hugged the box of osmanthus cakes in my arms tightly, completely satisfied. "Next time, right now, I just want to eat these osmanthus cakes." On the day of my return to my parental home, my father was so happy that his grin almost reached his ears. When my mother saw Lu Lin personally helping me down from the carriage, she couldn't help but reveal a loving smile. My mother used to say that Gu Si Yuan, who fought on the battlefield and faced life and death situations, was not within her criteria for a son-in-law. From the way she looked now, my mother seemed quite satisfied with Lu Lin. Lu Lin greeted everyone with a respectful bow, instructing his servants to move the gifts he had brought into the Duke of Doning's residence. Qin Yanlang, however, wore an expression full of resentment. His eyes were dark with heavy bruises, and his entire appearance resembled someone possessed by a ghost. I couldn't help but tease him. "Qin Yanlang, have you given up on collecting authentic works of famous artists and turned to smoking opium instead?" Qin Yanlang's only hobby was collecting calligraphy and paintings. Despite being swindled a few times, he never learned his lesson. With a pitiful expression, Qin Yanlang said, "Sister, it's because I was so worried about you that I couldn't eat or sleep. And yet, who would have thought that you—" He didn't finish his sentence, but instead, he glared angrily at Lu Lin standing beside me. Although Qin Yanlang wasn't always reliable, I knew he was a competent elder brother. He was worried that my relationship with Lu Lin wasn't going well and that I might be suffering. "Sister, you and father and mother go into the house first. I have something to discuss with brother-in-law." After Qin Yanlang said this, he pulled Lu Lin aside, and the two of them whispered about something secretive. I went into the house with my parents, and about a quarter of an hour later, Lu Lin and Qin Yanlang finally came in. The previously listless Qin Yanlang was now visibly energized, his spirit lifted noticeably. I could easily guess that Qin Yanlang had received some benefit, but he wouldn't say a word about it. Lu Lin also remained tight-lipped on the matter. I figured it wasn't anything important, so I didn't press further. As the sweltering heat approached, I dreaded the heat the most. Even though there were 2 ice basins in the room, the nights were still unbearably hot, causing me to sweat in my sleep, making it difficult to rest well. Today, Lu Lin planned to take me to the summer retreat to escape the heat and busily instructed the maids to pack fresh clothes for me. Unexpectedly, a young servant suddenly came in to report that Gu Si Yuan had invited me to his residence for a chat. Seeing that I agreed and was still sitting in front of the bronze mirror doing my makeup, Lu Lin sat sulking beside me. He muttered under his breath, "What's wrong with Gu Si Yuan? You both are already married, yet he still doesn't know how to keep his distance." I applied powder while facing the mirror and replied, "Gu Si Yuan is not someone who lacks propriety. Perhaps there's something important." "Oh, you know him best." Lu Lin took the eyebrow pencil, lifted my chin with one hand, and carefully outlined my brows. Hearing the jealousy in his tone, I tentatively asked, "Why don't you come along with me?" Only then did Lu Lin's face light up with a smile. "Since you have sincerely invited me, I shall graciously accept the offer." I was a frequent guest at the general's residence, and the steward knew me well. He directly led me to Gu Si Yuan's courtyard. The arrangement in the yard had remained unchanged for many years, and under the osmanthus tree, there used to be a swing. Ever since I broke it with a punch when I was a child, it had been left vacant. At this moment, Gu Si Yuan was sitting in the pavilion in the courtyard, sipping tea. Upon seeing Gu Si Yuan, Lu Lin wore an impatient expression and said, "Gu Si Yuan, if you have something to say it quickly. Don't waste my time. Nian Qing and I are heading to the retreat to escape the heat." Gu Si Yuan ignored him and only spoke to me. "Nian Qing, it's she who said she wanted to see you." "So, it was Lin Xi who wanted to meet me. But I wasn't very familiar with her, so why did she want to see me?" I went to the inner courtyard alone to find Lin Xi, while Lu Lin stayed behind to drink tea and chat idly with Gu Si Yuan. When I saw Lin Xi, she was lazily reclining on a wicker chair, her face pale and looking somewhat fatigued. "Qing Yan Qing, you've come," Lin Xi spoke weakly. "I've been feeling dizzy and nauseous recently, unable to rise to greet you. Please excuse me, you can just lie down," I said, knowing that a woman with a child in her womb would suffer from many discomforts. Given her state, Lin Xi must have something important she needed to say. Lin Xi seemed to have sensed my concerns and didn't bother with any pleasantries. "I'll get straight to the point," she said. "Actually, you and Lu Lin always following Si Yuan and me. We've known about it all along." Was this really how she was going to start the conversation, so directly? I felt embarrassed and tightly gripped the silk handkerchief in my hand, feigning composure. When did you realize? Don't be nervous, I didn't call you here to settle old scores." Lin Xi covered her mouth with a light laugh. "It's just that Si Yuan is overly vigilant. The first time you and Lu Lin followed us to Jiuling Mountain to admire the plum blossoms, he already noticed your presence." The trip to Jiuling Mountain to admire the plum blossoms marked the first time Lu Lin and I worked together. At that time, both Lu Lin and I were quite pleased with ourselves, thinking our plan was flawless, and that it was only a matter of time before we managed to break them apart. Unexpectedly, before we could even begin, we were caught red-handed by the very person we were targeting. I awkwardly forced a smile, realizing that silence was probably the best option at that moment. Lin Xi rested her chin in her hand, looking at me with a mischievous glint in her eyes. I found it amusing back then. I didn't let him raise the alarm because I was curious to see what exactly you two were up to. Speaking of which, everyone in the capital praised Lin Xi as the epitome of a noble woman. Only Lu Lin and I had seen the true nature she revealed when she was with Gu Si Yuan. I once believed that Gu Si Yuan liked Lin Xi because of her gentleness and virtue. Little did I know, Lin Xi had been pretending all along. On the surface, she appeared to be the graceful and virtuous daughter of a prestigious family, but in private, she laughed so hard that she doubled over. She would take off her shoes and socks to lean over the boat and play with the water, and she would stand with her hands on her hips, loudly arguing with Gu Si Yuan. Casually tucking a lock of hair behind her ear, Lin Xi continued, "After observing you both for half a year, I finally noticed something odd. The way Lu Lin looks at you is far from innocent. That man cares for you deeply, so I thought I might as well bring you two together. Do you remember during the Lantern Festival, when you lost track of us on South Street? That was deliberate on our part. Fortunately, my efforts to create several opportunities for you two to meet didn't go to waste. In the end, you stumbled into marriage anyway. Originally, Si Yuan worried that I might be wrong, but last month at the princess residence, I learned of your feelings for Lu Lin, and that set his mind at ease. I was completely speechless by now, so, without realizing it, Lu Lin and I had also become the subjects of Lin Xi and Gu Si Yuan's surveillance. Indeed, it was like a mantis stalking a cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. I let out a soft sigh and smiled at Lin Xi. "Still, I should thank you. If it weren't for the events of the Lantern Festival, I might not have realized how much Lu Lin had already filled my heart." "No need to thank me." Lin Xi waved her hand triumphantly. "It's just that Lu Lin was too slow to act. If I hadn't given him a little push from behind, who knows if you two would have ever." She hesitated for a moment, then changed her tone. "Forget it. I'll leave the rest for Lu Lin to tell you himself. Actually, the reason I called you here today is that I have something else to tell you. A secret about Lu Lin." When Lin Xi mentioned Lu Lin, my interest piqued. "What secret?" Afterward, Lin Xi told me about Lu Lin's childhood. Her Lin family had long-standing ties with the Lu family, and she and Lu Lin could be considered childhood friends. Back then, the Marquis of Qingyang's family came from a line of military generals, renowned for their heroic achievements, basking in endless glory. However, when Lu Lin was just 2 years old, his parents, along with the entire Lu family army, perished in battle to protect the citizens of the border town. From then on, the once flourishing Lu family dwindled, leaving only old Marquis Lu and his wife, along with the young Lu Lin. When Lu Lin's grandmother was still alive, she couldn't bear to see her grandson follow in his parents' footsteps. Against the objections of old Marquis Lu, she deliberately fed Lu Lin until he was plump, ensuring he would be cut off from the path of a military general. She only wished for him to live as a wealthy and carefree person, with a peaceful and smooth life. Thus, until he was 13, Lu Lin was a chubby boy who would be out of breath after taking just a few steps. Once, old Marquis Lu took Lu Lin to another estate for a banquet. Because of his rotund and bloated figure, he was mocked by several young noble sons of the aristocracy. At that moment, a little girl stepped forward and scolded those unruly boys, driving them away. After that incident, Lin started losing weight because of her. Every day, before dawn, he would get up and run 20 laps around the courtyard. He persisted without fail for nearly 3 years. Lin eventually transformed, shedding his old self, and became a slender and handsome young man. With a teasing tone, Lin Xi said, even though everyone praised him for having a face like jade, Lin still felt insecure and didn't dare approach the girl he liked. The more I listened, the more my expression darkened. Was Lin Xi here to show off? I felt a bit jealous, and said, changing for someone you like? I did something like that too when I was young and naive, so it's not much of a secret. Lin Xi squinted her eyes, looking like a sly fox. The reason it's a secret is because that little girl wasn't me. It wasn't you? I was momentarily stunned. Then, who was it? Lin didn't like Lin Xi. You'll have to ask Lin yourself when you get the chance. After leaving those words, Lin Xi said she was too tired and wanted to take a nap. Seeing that she looked drowsy, I didn't stay much longer. On the way back to the mansion, Lin kept complaining, Gu Si Yuan is so long-winded, always talking about irrelevant things. I didn't want to listen at all. I wanted to ask Lin about that little girl. But then I reconsidered. Since we were already married, there was no need to bring up old matters and cause unnecessary trouble. By the way, why did Lin Xi come looking for you? Lin asked, feigning nonchalance. I rested my head on his shoulder and replied, you'd never guess. Lin Xi and Gu Si Yuan knew from the start that we were secretly following them. Lin didn't seem surprised. He just said in a hoarse voice, Gu Si Yuan has spent years out on the battlefield. He's developed eyes as sharp as a hawk's. No prey or enemy can escape him. So, did Lin Xi not say anything else? As expected, Lin still cared about Lin Xi. I clung tightly to his arm and said, it was just idle chatter between women, nothing important. Lin gave a soft and said no more. I could feel his tense shoulders suddenly relax. After finishing lunch, we immediately set off to the mountain retreat to escape the summer heat. Lin said that this retreat was his secret hideaway. Every year during the hottest days of summer, he and his grandfather, old Marquis Lu, would stay here for a month or so. However, this year, old Marquis Lu's leg ailment had flared up, making him unable to bear the mountain winds, so he couldn't come along. The mountain was lush with greenery, and a cool breeze blew gently. The furnishings in the retreat were simple and rustic, except for a swing under the large tree in the courtyard, which seemed a bit out of place. Curious, I asked, why is there a swing in the retreat? Lin glanced at the swing, his gaze deep and thoughtful. I had it made especially for you. After saying that, he instructed the maids who accompanied us to pour me some plum wine, then hurried back inside to sort out the luggage. I leisurely sat on the swing, cooling off while sipping the chilled plum wine from the icebox. After enjoying the breeze for a good 1 hour, the heat on my body completely dissipated, yet Lin still hadn't come out. Puzzled, I wondered, what's taking him so long? Jumping off the swing, I walked back into the house, where Lin was bending over, pulling out a large stack of paintings from a redwood box. Lin, what are you doing? My sudden voice startled him, and the paintings in his arms spilled onto the floor with a rustle. Several scrolls rolled in different directions, and one of them had a loosely tied cord, causing the entire painting to unfold before my eyes. Why does the scene look so familiar? I picked up the painting and studied it carefully. Under a flourishing osmanthus tree stood a swing. A little girl, about 10 years old, sat on the swing, soaring high with a radiant smile. Behind her was a chubby boy, holding the position of pushing the swing. I stared at the goldfish pendant the little girl was wearing and murmured, this is the osmanthus tree and swing in Gu Si Yuan's courtyard, and the girl on the swing is me. But who is the boy standing behind? Suddenly, I recalled what Lin Xi had told me, and a long-forgotten memory surfaced in my mind. It was about 8 years ago, when the Gu family hosted a banquet to celebrate their move to a new residence. I found the banquet boring, so I dragged Gu Si Yuan to the courtyard to play on the swing. However, after pushing me half-heartedly a few times, Gu Si Yuan made an excuse about needing to attend to the guests and quickly slipped away. I wanted to call Qin Yan Lang, but I had no idea where he had gone. Feeling disappointed, I sat on the swing when a chubby-looking boy approached. He shyly scratched his head and said, I'm strong, how about I push you? Thank you so much. I replied happily. After that, the boy pushed me with all his might, and I had a great time. But then, some unpleasant people showed up and started mocking him, saying he had a fat head and big ears, comparing him to a pig. I immediately jumped off the swing and punched the swing frame so hard that it broke. Did you guys just eat crap? Want me to dunk your heads in a water barrel to wash your mouths? Frightened by my boldness, they fled in panic. The boy, however, worried that the broken swing frame would get me punished by old General Gu, and he even offered to take the blame for me. I reassured him, don't worry, this swing frame was left behind by the previous owners. Gu Si Yuan was planning to get rid of it anyway, now he can just chop it up and use it as firewood for the kitchen. The boy laughed and pulled out a paper-wrapped bundle. Inside were 2 pork knuckles, and he handed one to me. Here, have one. We squatted under the osmanthus tree, gnawing on the pork knuckles. As I ate, I said, it would be even better with some vinegar. Pork knuckles dipped in vinegar are the best for cutting the grease and enhancing the flavor. The boy blinked, his face lighting up with curiosity. Really? I'll try that next time. Later, I heard Qin Yanlang calling for me, so I had to wave goodbye to the boy. I crouched down and picked up the second painting. The scene depicted the Marquis of Dongning's residence, at my coming-of-age ceremony. In the painting, I was shamelessly tugging at Gu Si Yuan's robe, asking him for a coming-of-age gift, and a young man, as pure as the moon and gentle as the breeze, stood to the side, glancing in our direction. He appeared to have grown thinner, and taller too. His hands, clasped behind his back, held something tightly. Upon closer inspection, it was a hairpin. I remembered that at the coming-of-age ceremony, Gu Si Yuan had gifted me a dagger that could cut through iron like mud. I stomped my foot in dissatisfaction and said, Gu Si Yuan, you're so insincere. Later, my mother found a brocade box among the guests' gifts, and inside was a hairpin in the shape of a goldfish playing with a lotus. In a cool tone, my mother said, look at this. Gu Si Yuan couldn't even match the thoughtfulness of a guest. Because the hairpin was so intricately crafted, with the goldfish looking almost lifelike, I have kept it in my dressing box to this day. So, it turns out the hairpin was gifted by the young man in the painting. I quickly unfolded the third painting. In the painting, the festival lanterns lit up the night as if it were day, and the boy had almost reached adulthood. His figure appeared even taller and more slender, completely overlapping with the present-day Lu Lin. However, at this time, Lu Lin was being silly, imitating Gu Si Yuan. Not only did he wear a light moon-white brocade robe, but his hair was also tied up with a similarly styled bamboo-patterned jade hairpin. He stood tall like a pine tree, his smile as gentle as the moonlight falling into one's arms, and even his smile resembled that of Gu Si Yuan. Since it was the lantern festival, he was holding a goldfish lantern, which did not match him at all. With a melancholy expression, he turned his head and looked at the girl disappearing into the crowd. Before this, Lu Lin had willingly acted as a stand-in for Lin Xi, and I couldn't help but advise him kindly. Young Marquis Lu, imitating your rival in love is the worst strategy. Honestly, the moon-white color doesn't suit you. You would look much better in black. Whenever Lu Lin smiled, it was always wild and unrestrained, with a rebellious streak deep in his bones, having nothing to do with elegance. Fortunately, Lu Lin took my advice and no longer wore the scholarly moonwhite. Instead, he changed into a heroic and imposing black robe, neatly tying his hair with a golden crown. Speaking of which, that goldfish lantern looked oddly familiar. Oh, now I remember. Last year during the Lantern Festival, I shamelessly dragged Gu Si Yuan with me to South Street to look at the lanterns. Unexpectedly, halfway through, Gu Si Yuan quickly disappeared into the crowd to escape my pestering. At that time, I anxiously searched everywhere and, by chance, saw Gu Si Yuan standing with his back to me at the head of the Lover's Bridge. I rushed over and grabbed his arm without a second thought, afraid he might leave me again. Gu Si Yuan, don't even think about ditching me again. When Gu Si Yuan turned to look at me with a flushed face, I was startled to realize I had mistaken him for someone else. This gentleman only dressed similarly to Gu Si Yuan. Terrified, I let go of his arm and quickly bowed to apologize. I'm sorry, I mistook you for someone else. Before I fled in panic, I shoved the goldfish lantern in his arms as compensation for my mistake. It was also during this time that Gu Si Yuan, while avoiding me, happened to encounter Lin Xi, the girl destined for him, on the Lover's Bridge. The two of them fell in love at first sight, and soon after, they expressed their feelings to each other. I put away the painting and looked at Lu Lin with a mix of emotions. It was you who pushed me on the swing when we were young, you who gave me the goldfish hairpin, and last year during the Lantern Festival, the person I mistook. Was also you, all these years, you. When I was chasing after Gu Si Yuan, Lu Lin had always silently followed behind me. You finally recognized me. Lu Lin smiled knowingly, showing me the goldfish lantern from the wooden box. This is the lantern you gave me. I've kept it safe. I could no longer hold back. With a heart full of regret, I rushed into his arms. I'm sorry. I can't believe I forgot everything. Lu Lin gently patted my back. You can't be blamed for that. I never told you. I buried my face in his chest, my voice muffled as I said, then tell me now. I want to hear it. Alright, let's start from the day we met. Lu Lin began recounting the story, and it wasn't much different from what he'd painted. As for the 3 years during which he lost weight, he mentioned them briefly with just a few words. Lu Lin was completely honest, without hiding anything. He even mentioned last year's Lantern Festival, when he and Lin Xi had specifically arranged to go to South Street together. Lu Lin explained that it was Lin Xi who had accidentally seen the painting of the swing and discovered the secret he had hidden for so many years. Curious by nature, Lin Xi volunteered to be his strategist. Who would have thought that there were too many people releasing river lanterns and praying for blessings on the South Street Lovers Bridge, causing them to be separated. It was said that Lin Xi also mistook Gu Si Yuan for Lu Lin, which indirectly led to a happy marriage. I then found out that every time Lin Xi met with Gu Si Yuan, she would inform Lu Lin in advance. Last year, when I ran into Lu Lin at Zuishan Tavern, that had also been part of their plan. However, what they hadn't expected was that out of all the people in the bustling Zuishan Tavern, I would choose to sit at Lu Lin's table to share a meal. Wasn't it just fate? After listening to what Lu Lin said, I still had quite a few doubts in my heart that I couldn't help but express. Back then, did you pretend to like Lin Xi just to get close to me? Lu Lin smiled wryly. I never said it directly. You mistakenly thought I liked her, so I just went along with it. I thought back carefully. Indeed, during that time at Zuishan Tavern, Lu Lin had never explicitly said he liked Lin Xi. I tilted my head up to look at him directly. Then why did you drink so heavily at Lin Xi's wedding banquet? Lu Lin replied slowly. Alcohol gives courage to cowards. If I confessed my feelings to you and got rejected, I could blame it on drunken nonsense and still stay friends with you. You're such a fool. I punched him lightly. One last question. Why did you hang a portrait of Lin Xi in the bridal chamber? Lu Lin smiled helplessly and tapped my forehead with his finger. I guess my painting skills must be awful, because that was clearly a painting of you. Of me? Impossible. I said with absolute certainty. I've never played the qin in my life. Lu Lin's smile faded, and with a trace of grievance, he said, 2 years ago, you said you wanted to celebrate Gu Si Yuan's birthday, and you practiced playing Phoenix Seeks Its Mate in your residence. But it sounded so awful that you gave up halfway. I vaguely recalled such an incident and suddenly felt guilty, deciding to change the subject. How did you know about that? Don't tell me you peeked over my residence's walls. The painting in the bridal chamber only showed a silhouette from behind without a face, which made sense if he had only caught a brief glimpse while peeking over the wall. Lu Lin pressed a hand to his lips and chuckled softly. I only peeked that one time. I hadn't seen you leave your house for days, so I couldn't resist taking a look. As he spoke, his brow suddenly furrowed, and he realized something. Wait. If you thought the person in the painting was Lin Xi, then the painting you hung wasn't of me, but of Gu Si Yuan. Well, I bit my lip. Actually, the one I meant to take with me was your portrait. Before getting on the bridal sedan, I took the portrait of Lu Lin from the ancient shelf in my boudoir. Who would have thought that after getting into the sedan, when I opened it, it had somehow turned into Gu Si Yuan? So that's what happened, Lu Lin said, as he pulled out a painting from his sleeve and unfolded it for me to see. This is what I exchanged from your brother when we returned home, trading it for 10 authentic works of famous artists. My painting skills had always been extraordinary, and although I had improved a lot over the years, the features of the man in the painting were still all over the place. It was only by the black robe and the golden crown that one could barely recognize that it was Lu Lin. In the blank space of the portrait, a crooked, clumsy love poem was written. My heart longs for you, yet you remain unaware. Lu Lin gazed at me with a smile in his eyes. Your brother thought you had hidden a famous piece of artwork, so he seized the opportunity during your wedding to borrow it for research. Fearing you might notice, he randomly grabbed another painting from your room and stuffed it back as a substitute. Upon hearing this, I slammed the table in fury. That Qin Yan Lang. He's turned into a thief right under my nose, and you. Is my terrible painting really worth trading 10 authentic works for? Are you out of your mind? Of course it was worth it. Lu Lin's eyes shimmered like rippling water, and with deep affection, he said, "This was something you painted just for me, thanks to your brother, otherwise, how would I have known you had feelings for me?" The more I thought about it, the more wronged I felt. No, I can't let Qin Yan Lang off so easily. I'm going to storm back to the Marquis of Doning's residence right now and make him return those 10 paintings. I was so absorbed in my ranting that I didn't notice the increasingly entrancing look in Lu Lin's eyes. "Nian Qing, forget about the painting for now, can I?" Suddenly, Lu Lin scooped me up in his arms, his warm breath tickling my neck, sending a tingling sensation all over. Only then did I realize his mischievous intentions. No, facing such irresistible charm, I tried hard to restrain myself from succumbing to the temptation and firmly rejected. "It's broad daylight, under the heavens, how could we?" But before I could finish my sentence, Lu Lin sealed my lips with his own. Very quickly, my face flushed, my heart raced, and I surrendered without resistance. The hands that had been pushing him away turned into ones eagerly tearing at his clothes. As I pulled, I urged him, "Hurry, take me to the bed." A gentle breeze lifted the bed curtains as our figures intertwined. His delicate kisses drowned me in endless desire. "Wait," I stopped Lu Lin's further actions. "There's still one important question I forgot to ask. Back at Gu Si Yuan's wedding banquet, what did you whisper in my ear?" "Nian Qing." Lu Lin's voice lingered in the air, his tone soft and filled with longing. "I love you and want to marry you." I wrapped my arms around his neck, responding eagerly, "Lu Lin, I love you too." Outside the window, the shadows of the tree swayed, a cicada mistakenly landed on the swing frame, chirping endlessly. We met in our youth, and from the moment love sparked, it ran deep and true.